Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Douglas Mackinnon's TV series, Good Omens. This was created by Neil Gaiman, based on the novel that Gaiman wrote with Terry Pratchett in 1990. At time of filming, there are 2 seasons of Good Omens. I'm going to talk about both of them. I think I've seen that there are talks for a 3rd season or something. There's likely to be a 3rd season in the works, but at this point, 2 seasons. So, the first season, absolutely brilliant. Incredibly spectacular. So, first off, this show stars David Tennant as the demon Crowley and Michael Sheen as the angel Aziraphale. The premise of the show as a whole is that Crowley and Aziraphale are on Earth. They have been working for their respective sides, hell for Crowley, heaven for Aziraphale, and the good deeds that Aziraphale is doing and the bad deeds that Crowley are doing end up canceling each other out. And humans do most of the good and bad stuff anyway, so it's all a wash. So basically, they just sort of agree to join forces on Earth and sort of take it in turns for who's going to do good and bad stuff. And then they send in reports to their head offices. Both heaven and hell in these series, in this show, are very bureaucratic. So this ends up working out really, really well for them. And they basically get to carve out comfortable lives on Earth, just doing whatever they want to do. The first series is based around the coming of the apocalypse. That series kind of begins with Crowley being assigned to deliver the Antichrist. The goal is then to have the Antichrist grow up to be about 11 years old, and then to launch the apocalypse so that heaven and hell can finally have the war that never really got settled when Lucifer and the fallen angels were cast out. Both heaven and hell want the apocalypse to happen. It's Crowley and Aziraphale who don't want it to happen because they're having quite comfortable lives on Earth, not really doing too much of anything in terms of like working for heaven and hell, just sort of being around, pursuing their own interests. So they attempt to thwart the apocalypse, despite it being presented, particularly by the angels, Gabriel especially, played by John Hamm, as the divine plan. Like this is what has to happen. Alongside this, there's a number of sub-stories, one of which deals with Agnes Nutter, a 17th century witch who's burned at the stake by Witchfinder General, thou shalt not commit adultery, Pulsifer. Agnes has written the only completely true book of prophecies in human history, and her descendants, up to and including Anathema, who becomes a central figure in thwarting the apocalypse, #spoilers, have basically like followed these prophecies, attempting to understand them so that eventually they can either play their role in or thwart the end of the world. Anathema ends up hooking up with I can't remember his first name. Newton Pulsifer. Newton Pulsifer being the descendant of thou shalt not commit adultery, Pulsifer. So they end up hooking up in a sort of ironic inversion of their ancestors' relationship, in which thou shalt not commit adultery, Pulsifer lit Agnes Nutter on fire, but she had sort of laced her garments with gunpowder and nails, and so anyway. So this is an example of what makes the first season of Good Omens so spectacular. Everything is tightly interwoven. Every piece of the story connects to other pieces of the story. It is an intricate web. From a craft perspective, from a storytelling perspective, it's amazingly brilliant. The storytelling is so tight and so interconnected, so dependent on each of these little pieces that when they're first introduced seem disconnected, but everything comes together to create the overall picture. It's amazingly well constructed. The humor is incredibly witty in its satiric playing up of or taking the piss from religion, from Christianity especially. But like mocking the idea that people have like calculated exactly when the earth was formed according to biblical creationism. Like it starts out with that, with this idea. And God, the voice of God, basically is like, yeah, this person got the closest, but he was still wrong by 15 minutes. And so it is this like funny little like snark at the ideas of religion, but then also snark at scientific ideas, non-theistic ideas. Like God tells us that, in fact, the bones of dinosaurs were put there as a joke that paleontologists haven't figured out yet. There are these sort of critiques of society and the hypocrisy of society and things like this. And Crowley and Aziraphale sort of not jump back and forth in time because they experience it as linear, but the series jumps back and forth in time. So they end up in whenever it was that Noah's flood was supposed to have occurred. They end up at the crucifixion of Jesus. They end up, we see them in ancient Rome, we see them in the French Revolution, we see them at the premiere of Hamlet, and so on and so on. So, and all of these things come together. They all tie together to the ultimate unity and function of the storyline. Everything in the storyline, again, depends on everything else, and so it's such a tightly constructed, brilliant plot. It really is one of those things that, I mean, I've watched the series 3-4 times now, the first series, and it is one of those things where every time you watch it, you will spot connections that you didn't see the time before. There's always more there because the storyline is so brilliantly constructed. Which is part of the reason it was so depressing to watch season 2. This is actually part of the thing. Like, this is one of the things I've actually long said about Firefly, Joss Whedon's Firefly. I'm glad there was no season 2. A lot of people in the fandom's community really wish there had been more to Firefly, wish for a season 2, because it was such a fantastic show. I'm really glad they ended it at one season, because I think if it had kept going, it would have just collapsed. It would have been terrible, I think. And it would have ruined the first season that was, again, this just sort of sparkling gem of storytelling and character development. Season 2 of Good Omens does that. It's so bad compared to the first season. Part of the problem is that it doesn't seem to go anywhere. There is an overarching plot, the same way there is with the first series, but we don't really know what the overarching plot is, and we don't really get many actual clues to it until basically the last episode, where the whole thing is kind of revealed. So, whereas in the first series, we knew from episode 1 that the Antichrist was on Earth, we are moving toward the apocalypse within a set amount of time, we have to see how Crowley and Aziraphale get there and how they attempt to thwart it. With season 2, Gabriel, minus his memory, shows up at Aziraphale's bookstore and is like, yeah, I don't know anything about who I am, who you are, whatever. I just felt like I needed to come here because people are looking for me and they want to do something bad to me. And that's mostly what we have for the overwhelming majority of the episodes. It's just this vague sense that Gabriel, minus his memories, has that somebody is looking for him for nefarious purposes. There's nothing... I mean, Aziraphale and, to a lesser extent, Crowley are trying to figure out what's going on, but it's not really a teleological movement. It's not a movement toward a particular end, necessarily. It's much more random, much more arbitrary. The storylines don't really fit together. They're kind of like, the main sort of subplot of this series is that Aziraphale is trying to get Nina and Maggie together. Nina owns the coffee shop across the street. Maggie owns a record store that she basically doesn't pay Aziraphale rent for because she gets records that are hard to find, and then he just sort of takes them in lieu of getting paid rent. Maggie has a crush on Nina. Nina has a not necessarily abusive partner, but a rather controlling partner. And Aziraphale decides that he wants to fix them up. Why? Who knows? I mean, they spend a massive amount of time on it. I personally was never really invested in either Maggie or Nina. Maggie's kind of mewling and pathetic. Nina's kind of aloof and slightly bitchy. There just wasn't much about either of those characters that convinced me I should be concerned with whether or not they hooked up or whether or not they were even happy. It was somewhat arbitrary. Along with this, we have a number of historically or biblically based storylines that take up a tremendous amount of time. Aziraphale attempts to stop Crowley from destroying all of Job's stuff, and Crowley is basically like, hey man, I've got a permit. God said it's totally fine to just fuck with Job in whatever ways we can come up with, so... And then Aziraphale is basically like, that doesn't sound like a good thing for God to have done. We've also got this lengthy resurrectionist storyline set in 19th century Edinburgh, where these girls who are on the street are basically like digging up corpses to sell to medical lecturers, which was a very common illegal practice at the time. Not clear why we need it. Not clear what it does in terms of advancing the story. I mean, I can see thematic connections between these things, like this idea that sometimes what seems like it's good is actually evil, and what seems like it's evil is actually good. Okay. I mean, given that we've kind of already seen that idea developed much more effectively in the first season, it seems like there's a disproportionate amount of time spent if that's really the only payoff here. I mean, ultimately, this is This is a series in which a lot of stuff happens, but it doesn't feel like there is a thing that happens, if that distinction makes sense. Like, in the first series, a lot of things happen. Individual incidents, bits and pieces, individual conflict, concerns, whatever it is. All of it fits together. All of it is in the service of moving toward and ultimately thwarting the apocalypse. In series 2, a bunch of stuff happens. Bits and pieces, individual conflicts, individual concerns, whatever it is. And none of it seems to matter that much. I mean, the ultimate upshot is, in the last episode, we kind of just get the whole thing revealed. For the last episode or two, whatever it is. We kind of just get the whole thing revealed. Why Gabriel has actually given up his memory. That Gabriel and Beelzebub, the lead demon of hell, under Lucifer, presumably, are trying to thwart a second go at the apocalypse so that they can have a romantic relationship. It's all just sort of revealed, and it's incredibly unsatisfying. It's a weird series, man, because, again, the first season is so amazing, so incredibly good and well-constructed and thoughtful and funny and insightful. And then the second series is not really any of those things. I mean, a lot of the acting is still good because David Tennant and Michael Sheen especially are so amazing. John Hamm is really, really good, but many of the other actors are just not given that much to work with. It's a depressing second season. And if they are doing a third season, I really, really hope it's better because it has the potential to be so good if it's done right.